What we're looking at here is the ES2 synthesizer from Logic. This is a 3-oscillator instrument with a pretty sophisticated modulation matrix in here that allows us to take information from one of the 2 LFOs or one of the 3 envelopes as an example and feed them to any number of different possibilities in Logic. It's pretty sophisticated, and we can do so either directly or through some kind of secondary modulator, like having an LFO first feed through an envelope before it reaches the target, or some kind of hardware source like the modulation wheel, for example, where you would have manual control from your keyboard. Pretty amazing possibilities in here and a great sounding instrument. This is the filter section in here, which is has a lot of really nice features for creating pretty rich colors. Let's take a look at the 3 oscillators here, and we've got this triangle that has a little dot in it. The idea here is that the oscillator 1, oscillator 2, notice the nice Star Wars-like graphics there, oscillator 3 with more graphics there. When they're selected, when they're on, the number turns green, and those sort of sliding doors, if you will, open up to reveal what the current setting is for the waveform. I'm going to turn off 2 and 3 for the moment. And let's just hear what the sound we've got here. Basically just a sine wave at the moment that has a little bit of coloring through the filter and a couple other things. Okay, so pretty much just a pure tone. Now what I've done in the modulation matrix is set up LFO2 as my source. I'm not going through anything, so this middle stage is just, it's not doing anything. It's not blocking or manipulating that LFO in any way. And then it's ending up here at the pitch of 1, 2, and 3. So basically, if I want to open up 2 and 3 to make them active, this LFO will be affecting their pitch as well. I can choose each of the oscillators independently, and I can choose a whole bunch of other options too. So LFO2, we've got a whole bunch of different options here as far as waveform types that we can use to shape the LFO. We have the same set of options here for LFO1. The difference with LFO1, and this is kind of useful if especially if you're using the LFO like a vibrato, you can actually delay the onset of the vibrato, so you can tell it that you want it to hold for a second or 2 or less, more or less, whatever you want to do before the vibrato shape comes in. But both of the LFOs have all of the same waveform options. Up here with a triangle wave, we have 2 sort of a sawtooth with a mirror shape of the same thing. We've got a square wave here with also a mirror version of that. And then we have what's called a sample and hold. Now, sample and hold is really just a noise generator that's being held. Basically, it picks a point in that wave being created, and it holds that for a short period, the period that you define over here, and then it jumps to the next position. So it's noise, which by definition is unpredictable, but you can get some really interesting results from that. It is squared off, as you'll hear, so they're basically like short horizontal lines that jump from step to step. Down at the very bottom, we have a variation on that, which just has a higher, what we might call, slew rate, where instead of just holding on this solid horizontal line, it actually is almost more like a random sine wave, if you will. You'll be able to hear that when I play it. All right, so I'm going to bring up LFO2 here. I'm directing it to pitch 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to bring this guy above the center point, which is going to send it out as positive information. If I bring it below that point, it basically just gives you the mirror opposite of the shape. And the higher I go, the more intense the level that's coming from the LFO. So I'm going to put it right about there to start with. And let me hit a note on the keyboard. All right, you get the idea there. Let me just run down the list so you can hear what each one of these is doing. some crazy crazy sounds coming out there. You can do a whole bunch of different things with it. So one of the common uses of the sample and hold, the sort of squared off version of it, is to make that the old-fashioned sci-fi kind of computer processing sound. So that's obviously pretty straightforward to do. Another idea is taking a square wave as an LFO and using that to simulate the type of siren that you might hear on an emergency vehicle in Great Britain, for example. So I'm not trying to get the sound exactly, but just to get something that suggests it. So what I'm going to play with here is do a little bit of FM synthesis, where I've got our basic sine wave tone filter to start there, and I'm going to add in the second oscillator, but you'll notice that I don't have it balanced in at all. So all we're hearing is the output of oscillator 1, and I've got a sine wave coming from oscillator 2, and by controlling the setting from the basic sine wave all the way up to where you see the FM, I'm able to influence how much this sine wave is modulating the frequency of this sine wave. But later you'll see what we call the carrier. It's really just to give it a little bit more grit, to make it a little bit more intense. Let me turn down the volume a little bit, since we're getting a lot of harmonics from that. You get the idea. And from the idea of kind of layering these different effects, it might be interesting if we were to also add another step to this, which would be putting in like an envelope that's going to be shaping the pitch of each one of those, so that we get almost kind of like a Doppler effect going. So if I come down here and say that I want this to be envelope 2 that's doing the job, and I'm going to have it, let's start it in this position here, and my envelope 2 has got a very fast attack. We'll put a decay on it, and it's kind of a slower decay. We'll bring down the sustain level, and let's see what that does. Speed up a little bit. All right, so you kind of get the idea. There's a whole bunch of things that you can do, almost an infinite number of possibilities with all the routing that's going on, with all the different effects that are in here. But for the sake of this video, we're really focused on the LFOs and throwing in a little envelope to help along with it. But play with, if you have an instrument that has a number of LFO options on it, go through them on your own and explore. You can really come up with some interesting things.